raged in Europe, Baroness Vera Nikolić Podrinska, an artist by temperament and talent, resided in a sprawling estate along the wooded, winding road above the city of Zagreb, Croatia. Born in Zagreb in 1886, she was the daughter of Baron Vladimir Nikolić and Baroness Vera Nikolić. She studied painting from the age of 14, attended the Academy of Fine Arts, and continued her studies in Vienna and Paris. In 1917, she had her first one-woman show. Her portraits, nudes, still lifes, and landscapes reflect the influence of realism, impressionism, and cubism. Unusual for a woman of that era, she traveled extensively, even publishing a book describing her journey from Zagreb to Bangkok. Over the course of the war, the Baroness became the unlikely host and protector of nearly 100 U.S. airmen who had crash-landed in Croatia and been taken prisoner by the Croatian Armed Forces. Baroness Nikolić considered the airmen her guests and afforded them the best treatment available given the wartime conditions, including a generous wine ration and payroll receipts for their work performed in her vineyards. This film traces the experiences of several of those American POWs. During the war years, Zagreb was the capital of the independent state of Croatia. For centuries, Croatia had sought unsuccessfully to realize its destiny as a fully independent nation, embodying the fundamental principles of freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In the historical period of the Second World War, the fate of the POWs lay in the uncertainties of the terrifying political and military drama that was unfolding. Those were complex times. One could argue that no other nation drawn into World War II experienced as many conflicts of competing interest within the confines of its borders as did the tiny nation of Croatia, that beautiful piece of real estate nestled along the Adriatic coast. Through the personal accounts of several of the POWs, as well as that of a young American priest whom faith and war placed in their midst, we follow the events that transpired. On April 10, 1941, Colonel Slavko Kvaternik proclaimed the birth of the independent state of Croatia in the name of Dr. Ante Pavelić, exiled revolutionary leader of the Croatian uprisers. The proclamation was received by the Croatian people with enthusiasm and was seen as a victory after 23 years of Serbian genocidal policies toward the Croatian people. On April 10, 1941, John James Miley, the American consul in Zagreb, reported on the events as they happened. At noon, the head of the Croatian cabinet informed the U.S. consulate in Zagreb that Croatia had formally seceded from Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia, until then comprised of Croatia, Serbia, and Slovenia, had been dominated by a Serbian dictatorship, which Croatia now formally rejected. If Germany was surprised by Croatia's proclamation of independence, Italy was furious. Mussolini wanted no independent Croatia. He had the grandiose dream of restoring the ancient glory of the Roman Empire by seizing all of Croatia's territory. 12 Italian divisions, 200,000 Italian troops of the 2nd Italian Army marched into Croatia through Slovenia and the Adriatic coast. That prompted immediate diplomatic negotiation between Croatia's new government and the Italians, which led to the Pact of Rome that relinquished to Italy part of the Dalmatian coast. The signing of the pact resulted in a temporary alleviation of tensions, but paved the way to a long-term tragedy for the Croatian nation. In short, Croatia wanted its independence. Italy wanted Croatia to become its colony. Germany accepted Croatian independence with the expectation that Croatia would be incorporated into the domain of the Reich to counteract Italian expansion. Pavelić capitalized on the nation's hunger for freedom, and utilize world conflict to define his role in history. While initially considered an accomplished revolutionary and patriot by his followers, in the end, he was widely condemned for his ultra-nationalism, for his policy of appeasement towards Germany. In the 19th century, Croatian patriot Ante Starčević said Croatians want to be free from subjugation, not to exchange one subjugation for another. However, in the whirlpool of world conflicts, that is precisely what happened. The Serbian state and their terrorist Chetniks, an extreme right-wing nationalist guerrilla force, launched attacks on the unfortified frontier of the newly formed independent state of Croatia. The Chetniks and the Serbs joined with Tito's communist partisans with the intention of making the Croatian nation pay dearly for destroying their dream of a greater Serbia. Croatia's 1,300-year-old dream of independence was shattered. Attacked from the north, south, and east, the country became a killing ground. Our American pilots landed in the midst of this maelstrom. On Sunday, December 7, 1941, at 7:48 a.m. Hawaiian time, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service carried out a surprise preemptive military strike upon the United States against the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor.
Just a few minutes before 8 o'clock, we were awakened. We thought it was a drill. And then suddenly a guy yelled, "Hell, there goes a Jap torpedo plane." It flew right by our window. We were on the third deck of this window. The Japanese surprised us 100%. Not one gun was manned in the entire fleet. In the first 15 minutes, the Japanese did 85% of the damage. They were so successful. The burning ships, burning oil, the smoke was so dense that it was more like dusk than it was Sunday morning at 9:30.
The attack led to the United States' formal entry into World War II the following day.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Brother, so he was drafted. He entered the Air Force and went through gunnery school and was assigned to a B-17 Flying Fortress outfit. Most of you have heard of the Flying Fortress, a 4-engine airplane that was famous in World War II. And every plane back in those days, they would put a name on it. And my brother's plane was called Judy's Little Ass. And they were flying bombing missions over Germany. There were lots of times that there was a swarm of German fighters attacking them and trying to shoot them down. They had anti-aircraft fire. And about that time, a German fighter came up behind him, and of course he was out of ammunition, so he turned his gun up away from the fighter. And as the German fighter lined up behind him with his 6 machine guns, ready to fire at my brother's plane and blow him out of the sky, my brother thought, I'm dead, you know. So as he looked the German fighter pilot in the eyes, he raised his hands. And I guess the German pilot said, well, he surrendered, I got him. So instead, the German pilot gave him a salute and peeled off and left him. He was thankful for that occasion. that the German pilot did that. I asked him if he ever was able to contact that German pilot. Said, well, he had a new admiration for the German Air Force after that and respect for them. But he said, you know, if you bailed out over Germany and you floated down in your parachute and the civilians captured you, you were dead. He says you hoped that you were captured by the military. Anyway, one other event that happened to my brother, they got up pretty bad and they lost most of the engines on their airplane. They had 4 engines on a B-17. And the wing of the airplane hit a chicken house at this farm and killed a bunch of chickens and destroyed the chicken house. And the old farmer came out after the airplane got stopped and had his gun in his hand, said, you know, I gotta get payment for my chickens and my hen house you boys have destroyed. So the aircraft commander, the pilot of the airplane, got with the farmer and negotiated with him and ended up giving him the whole airplane and all its contents for the chickens they had killed and the chicken house they had destroyed.
Our American airmen unwittingly parachuted into the midst of this conflict. They survived, not by chance, but due to intervention and protection offered by political, military, and religious leaders, as well as private citizens in Croatia.
It is a fact that in my association with the independent state of Croatia and their authorities, their actions were exemplary and adhered to international law. Within the limits of their resources and facilities, the Croatian people provided timely and competent assistance to the United States Armed Forces personnel during the period of World War II.
I am C. Michael McAdams. I am a former Marine and currently a university administrator and educator. I became interested in World War II American airmen who were prisoners of war held in Croatia. I undertook an investigation to locate those American airmen who are still living to learn about their experience firsthand. Although I draw some conclusions about my findings, the primary purpose of this study is to present documentary evidence and let you draw your own conclusions concerning the treatment of these Americans while in captivity. My study is based primarily on interviews I conducted with them and a few other principal witnesses to the events that transpired.
My name is Billy T. Turner. I was a second lieutenant, a P-38 pilot doing bomber escorts.
My name is Marvin W. Cropper. I was a nose gunner on a B-24, rank of corporal.
I'm John LaRue. I was a tail gunner, a corporal on a B-24.
I'm an American-born Catholic priest. I finished all of my schooling, except for theology, in the United States. In 1938, I was sent by my superiors to Mostar, Croatia, to complete my theology studies and to get a greater understanding of the Croatian language.
Just call me MJ. I was on a photo reconnaissance mission in 1943 up the coast of Croatia.
I'm Sergeant Gene Keck.
My name is R.H. Jaris. I was a co-pilot and second lieutenant on a B-24.
In late 1943, an American fighter pilot, Billy T. Turner, landed his plane in eastern Bosnia. That sector was controlled by the Croatian Armed Forces. During the landing, the American officer suffered a fracture of his shoulder bone. Croatian guards took the officer to the battalion's hospital in Rogatica. He was retained there by a young officer from Zagreb, who acted as an orderly. The American officer asked not to be turned over to the Germans or to the partisans. From that time on, he lived and worked with Croatian soldiers.
Where were you taken when you were captured?
They picked me up in the mountains in Croatia. I was never with any of the other prisoners until right at the end of the war, when I went back to Zagreb. There were about 40 or 50 up there that they had picked up.
How would you describe your treatment immediately after the capture?
Well, that's difficult. It was scary, but these people were very friendly people. but we were warned that they could kill you and laugh at you at the same time. They were rough but jovial people, and they treated me good after word got around that I would stay until the war was over. I stayed right with the troops in the mountains and in combat. I worked with the medics, which was one doctor who had just gotten out of school and me.
Were you ever subjected to torture, humiliation, or bodily harm?
No, never.
What is your general opinion about the Croatian army?
I was surprised with their fighting strength, optimism, and spirit. Also, I was not only surprised by the determined stand of the Croatians against the communist partisan, but also by the resistance of Croatians to Germans in their country. This small unit where I was constantly resisted a German battalion which tried to force them out of Rogotica. Croatians wanted to be neither communist nor Nazi. They only wanted an independent state of Croatia.
Do you know of any American airmen who were shot while held captive?
I'd seen a bomber go down sometimes, but usually the crews were all torn up in the mountains. I never saw or heard of any other Americans until Zagreb.
On what date did you make your forced landing?
March 3rd, 1943.
This is a very early date for an American in that area. Were you the first American to be captured in Croatia?
No, there were at least 3 others, also a couple of British and I think an Aussie. The Australian had been there since '41. He was the old-timer.
Brought down by flak or?
No, mid-air collision over the coast of the Adriatic.
With an American plane?
Yes, we were regrouping after a mission. We were coming back, and a couple of the planes had fallen out to land in airstrips in northern Italy because we were low on fuel. We were regrouping, and one of the ships behind us and below us in the formation came up, and I don't know why or how, but anyway, he came up underneath us, and we had a mid-air collision.
Then did you force land at a Croatian field, or?
No, we crashed. We bailed out. The plane was not flyable.
How many crew members on a B-24?
10 of us.
Did all of your people make it down?
Well, let's see. If I remember correctly, 7 of us wound up as prisoners of the Croatian army, and 3 crew members bailed out before the 7 of us did. One of them was killed. I never did find out how, whether he was shot on the ground or whether his chute didn't open or what, but at any rate, he was killed, and 2 others. One was taken by the Germans and sent to a prison camp in Germany, and the other one Tito's partisan forces picked up.
You ran out of fuel?
We were low on fuel and we thought we'd hit the fields of Pech, Hungary. P-38 came in with us. The other one went back with the B-25. That was February 19th, 1945.
You were captured by German or Croatian forces?
That was in Bjelovar, and we were captured by troops under General Bobin, Croatian Army. That was his area.
Do you recall the flight number or aircraft number?
No. At that time, we just got the aircraft from the pool. Each time we would fly a different airplane. This time, I remember the plane was the Sky Pirate. In fact, I remember that the first words that I heard from General Raphael Bobin, he interrogated us. He was something else. He came right out of the hills of Bosnia and had a big German Shepherd with him.
On what date were you captured?
February 19th, 1945.
What were the circumstances of your capture?
We were hit in the right wing. Pretty big hole, really. Over Graz, in Austria. We thought we were landing in Budapest, Hungary. I don't think we could have gone any further. The navigator could have made a mistake, too. I don't think that he and the pilot were too friendly after that. But we were losing altitude, and we're going to come down someplace regardless. We all kind of voted to come in wheels down, and that is what we did. We landed right on the front lines. The guys in the Croatian army were right in front of us, toward the river. We came in behind them. Pilot Benkoski brought it in right where we were. Then they shot down the P-38 escort plane, which was strafing for us when we came in.
What exactly happened there?
American photo reconnaissance planes had taken pictures of the planes and had found that they were intact. The Americans wanted to destroy them so that the Croatians, or whoever, couldn't use them. It was on the third day, early in the morning, that 3 P-51s came up over the brow of the hill. The 51s did a beautiful job. I still have a bullet from that day. I picked it out of a tree. They set both aircraft on fire. An order then came in from the Croatian Air Force, and we were transported to the Air Force headquarters building in Zagreb.
I entered the U.S. Army after my 1943 graduation from Grand Meadow High in Sioux City, Iowa. By late 1944, I found myself stationed as a gunner in the nose turn out in front of a B-24. You go to the briefings around 4 or 5 in the morning, and they tell you to look at the man to your left and the man on your right. Chances were, one of you is not coming back that day. My 21st mission targeted fortified manufacturing plants in Vienna, Austria. German guns had the Americans' number on March 22, 1945. 4 of the 9 B-24s in my formation took on heavy fire and scattered. We could not get back over the Alps on our return because of the damage. We crippled back over Croatia, lost altitude badly, and had to bail out. I was the last man who ever spoke to the pilot, George Conaway from Texarkana, Texas. We were at 2,000 feet and falling fast. He told me to get the hell out of the plane, and I jumped. Somersaulted through the sky, pulled my ripcord, and I fell hard to the earth. My parachute shot up from German soldiers on the ground. The plane crashed into a hillside, killing George, our pilot, instantly. Of the 9 of us who jumped, 4 escaped. Germans found 5 crewmen, including me. I was knocked unconscious by the fall. All of us were taken prisoner and paraded before the locals in a nearby village. I was moved to a prisoner of war camp at Zagreb, where I served 3 months.
Where was the first place that you were held?
Well, I landed right in the middle of a little village in the mountains on the coast of the Adriatic, and I can't recall the name of the village. I was up in the mountains. We were held there one night. Then they marched us down to a little town down below. Otacach, I think it was the name of it. We were held in actually it was a pub for a couple of days, and then they moved us from there to Zagreb.
During your immediate internment in this small town, were you treated well?
We were treated fairly poorly there at Otacach. We weren't fed well where we were kept. Was an old bombed-out apartment that was in not too good a shape, and the facilities there were very poor. Nothing but a few old lice-ridden coats that they gave us for warmth, and we were all sleeping on the floor. So that wasn't too good, and then we got bombed. The British bombed us there a couple of times. They didn't bomb us, they bombed the town. There was a German garrison there. The officer in command, who was a colonel in the Croatian army, if I remember correctly, got us out of there, and we were moved to Zagreb.
While you were in Karlovac, or at any time prior to Zagreb, were you mistreated in any manner?
No, never. In fact, those guys were more afraid of me than I was of them, I think. I mean, they were too polite. They couldn't speak English, but it was obvious that they didn't want to do anything to offend me. They may have thought I was a big prize for their intelligence people or something. I think they did all right, considering what they had and me coming in without an invitation and everything.
What were the circumstances of your capture?
They took me to the headquarters building of the Air Force. It was right in Zagreb and maybe 3 or 4 stories high. A couple of officers asked me some questions. I gave them my name, rank, service number. but they were asking me questions about my mission and whether or not I had a camera on board. I loosened up a little bit as time went on. I started talking to them, not about military matters, but just conversation. Every one of the Croatians had a cousin in Chicago or something. Had I ever been to Chicago? Did I know his Uncle Joe? Just conversation.
And what was your initial treatment?
We were in the Air Force building about 5 or 6 days in downtown Zagreb. While we were there, the Americans bombed a couple of times. I remember we'd go to the basement and stand in the doorways, and you could feel the concussion. It was kind of an eerie feeling, knowing that you were bombed by your own plane. We had better food there, but it wasn't all that good. Their main diet was a kind of soup with something in it, such as barley or beans. The one piece of meat I had, I remember. That is where we met up with this Spitfire pilot named Rodney somebody. He'd been shot down in December and wounded. That gave us 12, and we formed the nucleus of the new prison camp.
What happened in Zagreb?
In Zagreb, we were held in the local jail. It was very overcrowded when they put us in there. They just didn't have facilities. They apparently decided that the quarters were just not adequate, so they moved us to a makeshift prison camp just on the outskirts of Zagreb. I'd say it was just north of the town, of the city. Some barracks from which from what we understood, had been used by a police unit prior to the war. The barracks were clean, comfortable, we had beds. The diet was very limited, but we had plenty of food, usually bean soup and bread.
Do you think that you were being fed as well as they could provide for you?
It seemed like it. They did let us contact the Red Cross. A member of the Red Cross was very supportive. There were even times when he brought us meat and some pastry somebody made, something like strudel. There was a baroness who lived right close by, and she provided us with a little wine once in a while. All in all, they really treated us great. The guards were domobrans. They were the old Croatian regular army guards. They were older people. They were nice enough.
About how many Allied airmen were in the Zagreb camp?
Approximately 93. That is a rough estimate, but 93.
There were predominantly bomber crews and 2 Russians.
Were the Russians treated any differently from the rest?
We were all treated just the same. They took our coats and things from us when we were in the Air Force building. We had those B-10 jackets, and most were decorated with flags and insignia. I remember seeing mine go by on a motorcycle. When we got out of the prison camp after a few days, we got them back. I can never figure that out. I still have mine.
A couple of days before Palm Sunday in March 1945, I was told that there was a POW camp at 203 Pantovčak Road in Zagreb. So I went there to see my fellow Americans.
Do you remember the names of any guards or officers?
Sure. There was one guard. He was the first sergeant, older guy. His name was Zvonimir Zemic, and a real nice guy. The other 2 guards weren't the same all the time. They'd change every couple of months. The CO was Lieutenant Bach.
What was your experience on a daily basis at the camp?
We often worked in the grape vineyards of Baroness Nikolić. We got paid with wine for our work. Around camp, there was no fences and little was done to prohibit escape. A Croatian officer at the time at the camp warned the POWs to stay clear of the SS men, whom he described as fanatics.
The American airmen were given a radio by the Croatian pilots and their commander, Dubai. And they listened to American and British stations. They listened to it every day.
Gentlemen, I'm Croatian Air Force Lieutenant Dubai. I understand that you have a senior officer here.
Lieutenant Benkoski, U.S. Air Command at your service.
We've been able to obtain permission for a small group of you to step outside these quarters on occasion to wander the grounds, to be able to use the tennis and volleyball courts. Activities of other sorts may also be arranged, such as visiting a nearby pub.
That is very fair of you, sir.
There's no fence around this property. These quarters are guarded by 4 soldiers. I'm reducing that number to a single guard on one condition.
What is that, Lieutenant?
It will be your responsibility to ensure the compliance of your men with our orders. Keep in mind that there are Germans stationed in the city.
You've given us a great deal of freedom.
May I have your word, Lieutenant?
Yes?
In that case, here are some good cigarettes for your men and a shortwave radio. You may listen to the American and British broadcasts to keep up with what is going on around the world.
Unsere beiden Schatten sahen wie ein Haus, dass wir lieb uns hatten, das sah man gleich daraus. Und alle Leute sollen es sehen, wenn wir bei der Laterne stehen, wie einst Lily Marley.
Can you give me a general statement about the conditions at the camp at the Baroness's?
It was a barracks that I understood had been a school or something for the Croatian Air Force. It was on the edge of a wooded area on or adjacent to the property of Baroness Nikolić. It was unique in that there was no fence and the guards simply watched us as a group. There was really a fair amount of freedom within limits.
The camp had no enclosure around it, and there was only one guard up on a hill. Visitors could visit the camp at any time.
Was the practice of religion forbidden?
No. I mean, we weren't what you call a real religious bunch of guys, but there was a Catholic priest who came out, spoke perfect English. He brought us stuff from town and had a kind of service on Sunday. I'm not Catholic, so I didn't stay around for the service. On Easter and Christmas, we had something special. On Christmas 1943, some women came out from the Croatian Red Cross and brought us some goodies. A couple of them had been out before. It was real nice. A treat in the whole works. Wasn't like being at home, but it wasn't like being in prison either.
Could the Catholic father have been Father Benkovic?
I think that could be it. They just called him by his first name, Father Ted.
Father Ted?
Yes, that was him. I'm pretty sure of it.
I said Mass every Sunday for the guys in the home of Baroness Vera Nikolić, a grand lady, much beloved by the American airmen as their Croatian mother.
Father Benkovic became the unofficial chaplain of the camp. On Sunday we would have chapel, and some of the Catholic fellows went a few times. I remember going with Jimmy W. Thige, who was a very devout Catholic.
A local Baroness Vera Nikolić Podrinska convinced the Croatian guards to allow her to host several POWs each Sunday at her villa. She served bread or toast with grape jelly. That was the best she had to offer. Those Sundays with her at the villa added a touch of humanity in our lives.
On Easter morning, the Baroness asked all who wanted to come over her house for services. You saw the picture of us with her. Our crew was a very close-knit group, except for Graf, and we kind of did things together. I mentioned that we were bombed. The Air Force headquarters itself wasn't bombed. The American forces were bombing the marshalling yards there. And this soldier gained access to our rooms. His wife and children had been killed that day. I remember he cried. What could we say?
Can you give me a general statement about the conditions at the camp at the Baroness's?
We had outhouses and a pump well for water. A wood stove in one corner of the barracks. I guess we had some sort of primitive lye soap. I remember the engineer, Earl Pleasant, and I found a bucket either around the building or at the edge of the woods there, and we didn't notice that it was lined with tar. We thought, well, our pants are getting really dirty. We were wearing wool olive drab uniform pants. We put some water in the bucket and my pants and his pants, and we got a fire going. Of course, as the water got hot, the tar got loose. We had a mess. And They shrank besides.
How were you treated in general?
Work was assigned to non-coms and officers. Records were kept of all of our work so that we could be paid after the war as provided for by the Geneva Convention. Given the chaotic situation at the end of the war, we were given vouchers instead of cash. One time the Croatian Red Cross brought us some packages. I think there was a half pound of sugar, a half pound of rice maybe a little salt.
Some of the POWs were actually permitted to frequent one of the local taverns until one night when the Germans came. And the Croatians were afraid that the Germans might do some harm to the American airmen or try to capture them, so...
We all flew with $49 in gold seal currency. It was not taken from me, and I used it while I was a POW. I bought toothbrushes for our crew. One time I bought some apples, some eggs. When I got out, I still had money. That $49 went quite a ways. I was told that the kuna, that was their currency, was worth 50 to $1 in peacetime. But by the end of the war, it was like 37,500 to $1.
They also had a tennis tournament on the courts of Baroness Nikolić. I believe Frank Ryan from Somerville, New Jersey, won the contest.
Let me put it this way. There were folks not much different from most of us. Their country was at war with itself, as much as it was with anyone else. America was to them some amazing place that some of their relatives had escaped to before the war. They were clearly more comfortable around us than around the Germans. They knew the Germans wanted to take their country over. No one was under any illusions about who the Germans were and what they were capable of. They protected us from the Germans as best they could, even at the risk of danger to themselves. The Baroness was a warm, gracious woman. To many of us, she was our second mom. When we were around her, we remembered our own families, and she wanted us to feel safe, normal. Small kindness, cookies, tea, smiles, concern about our health and well-being.
Do you feel that your treatment was in accordance with current international law?
I'll say this, the people there, the Croatians, they treated us better than their own troops. They did the best they could for us. Sometimes the food wasn't great, but we ate out of the same pot as the guards. We got what they got, and compared to Germany, that camp was a resort, a Boy Scout camp. I can't say one word against those people. They were simple people, some of them, but I think they were good people, and they didn't want to hurt me any more than I wanted to hurt them.
Were you at any time subjected to torture, humiliation, bodily harm, or threat thereof?
No, sir. Not while I was in Croatia, never.
Do you know of any Americans, or did you ever hear even second or third-hand stories of Americans or Allied airmen who had been shot while captive in Croatia?
No. I heard something like that after the war here in the States. My guess is that maybe they were shot by the Germans or something. I don't know what that poor old top sergeant would have done if we tried to escape. You should have seen the tears in his eyes when the Germans came and got us. No, those people never shot any POWs, no way.
What was the attitude of the Croatians?
The attitude of the Croatians was that when the war ended, the Americans would help the Croatians. They deadly feared, of course, the Russians and the communists. We had dignitaries come out to us just before the end of the war. I don't know who they were. They talked about the Bolsheviks and what they would do and how they feared them. We had an interpreter named Vladimir Dubai, who was the son of a diplomat or something. He had quite a bit of education. He became attached to the camp and acted as our interpreter and liaison. He and Edward J. Benkoski from Westford, Mass. were given this plane that would have been like a small private plane in the country. It was a Croatian Air Force plane. He flew this Vladimir Dubai south, I think to Split.
Lieutenant Benkowski, you're an experienced pilot. Having flown the Sky Pirates escort fighter, looks like this would be the perfect day to fly. Will you join me?
The clear skies beckon.
I was thinking,
Yes?
let's fly with a specific goal in mind.
What might that be?
There are partisan units on the Adriatic coast. It is my intention for us to fly down there.
I thought those communists were your enemies.
They are.
They'll shoot us down.
We will take a small, unmarked plane, not a military aircraft.
What exactly will we do there?
My aim is to try to negotiate with them to transfer custody of all your men to the British so that you will be able to return home safely and not fall into the German hands here.
How can you be sure that the partisans will help and that they will agree to it?
We have no assurances. Our intelligence suggests that the partisans are in contact with the British troops stationed on the island of Vis in the Adriatic. I have been instructed to make the offer.
How can I help?
I need you as an American to tell them how many of you there are. Your presence will lend credibility to our request.
In that case, it's worth a try.
Our plane awaits us.
He was going to see if he could negotiate with them for us, and they shot him.
The partisans?
Yes. Tito's partisans shot him.
The Baroness had a celebration in her home at Easter and Christmas. And she invited the Americans, the British, the Australians, and the South African airmen to her home. At Easter, she served lamb. At Christmas, she served duck. And always wine from her vineyards.
Vor der Kaserne, vor dem großen Tor, steht eine Laterne und steht sie noch davor. Dort wollen wir uns wiedersehen.
World News Today. CBS reporters are waiting to bring you first-hand news from the world's political and battlefronts. Now, here's Douglas Edwards.
There's a possibility that Cherbourg has fallen. Nothing official yet from Allied quarters, but Berlin concedes that the big port probably is now in our hands. The news agency DNB says the German garrison fought to the last bullet, but we repeat, that's not confirmed so far.
My brother, on their B-17 missions to Germany, many times had fighter escorts, and those were typically the P-51 Mustang, and the other one was the P-47 Thunderbolt. My brother was telling me about when the Germans, invented the first jet engine, and they had the first jet-powered airplane, the Messerschmitt 262. And on one of my missions, my brother said that ME Messerschmitt 262 came through their squadron. It was so fast that neither the 51 or the P-47 could touch it. That German Messerschmitt 262 shot down 7 B-17s and without a scratch, and then left and flew away and was not shot down by any of our fighters. So everybody was in a panic when they got back after that mission.
CBS reporters are waiting to bring you first-hand news from the world's political and battlefronts. Now, here's Douglas Edwards.
There'll be love and laughter and peace ever on.
Father Vinkovich, may I offer you a cup of tea?
Most certainly.
When the world is free.
Thank you so much.
The shepherd will tend his sheep. The valley will bloom again. And Jimmy will go to sleep in his own little room.
So much snow this winter.
There'll be bluebirds over.
The snow will melt, and the flowers will bloom again.
Just you wait and see.
It is all finally coming to an end, is it not?
The boys will be fine. The boys will be fine.
And you and I will have a new burden to bear, to survive the end of the war. Dignity alone will not be enough. It may not be possible at all. You and I are witnesses, and what happened here will have to be told.
The truth will be told across the ocean, but I'm afraid it will be a long time before it's told here.
Will we live long enough to see at least the first rays of the light of freedom?
Perhaps not, but there will be others with faith and knowledge who are yet to come, and they will not fail.
I still can hear them say, thumbs up.
The boys will be fine.
For when the dawn comes,
The boys will be fine.
there'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. Tomorrow, just you wait and see.
What was the date and what were the circumstances of your removal from Croatian captivity?
November 2nd, 1944. The Germans just drove up in a couple of trucks and took us. The Croats just stood there. What could they do? I mean, about 24 SS boys and a high-ranking officer. Our 3 guards just stood there. They didn't expect it any more than we did. And those guys meant business. They were for real. It was kind of a rude awakening. I mean, we knew there was a war on. We saw the planes and the bombing in town, and we knew that we were prisoners, but we felt like we were just destined to sit the war out. This was our little home for a while. 12 hours later, we were back in Germany or Austria. We were in the real world. Never saw Croatia again.
Do you think that the Croatian officials knew the Germans were going to take you out?
I think it was just like a raid. The Nazis were pulling out all over then. I think they just picked us up like they picked up the rest of the gear. I'll never know why either. I'll never know why.
I had a month to wait before the war was really over there. On June 16th or 17th, then we flew out in B-26s.
I could have flown home, but opted not to. The air thick with life or death memories. Instead, I and 49 fellow POWs boarded a converted luxury liner. We landed in Virginia, and all 50 of us stepped off that ship, got down on all fours, and kissed the ground. We were darn happy to be home. I never expected to see the U.S. again. I can truthfully say I am one who beat the 100-to-1 odds of getting home.
I owe my life to the Americans with the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. Those officials arranged my escape by plane from Tito's communist partisans who came marching into Croatia at the end of the war.
In 1945, just a few days after the end of World War II, Tito and his communist partisans initiated an extermination campaign against men, women, and children they viewed as enemies of the regime. The mass slaughter began with the repatriation of 700,000 Croatian and Slovenian civilians and soldiers who fled to Austria, seeking asylum immediately at the close of the war to escape the victorious communists. The refugees were deceived into believing they were being sent to the American safe zone in Italy. Instead, they were loaded onto trains and sent back to Yugoslavia. Large numbers were massacred outright upon their return. Others died on forced death marches and in mass executions across the country. The Croatians who had protected our American pilots now faced shockingly harsh reprisals. With Tito's assuming power in the country, he began to transform Yugoslavia into a dictatorship of the proletariat. Baroness Vera Nikolić Podrinska was imprisoned, her villa and sprawling estate confiscated and dynamited. On the very spot where it stood, Tito had a grand presidential palace erected that serves that function still today. Communist ideology justified the seizing of private property of Croatian civilians and nobility, as well as the banishment and murder of people viewed as enemies of the regime. All of the American POW airmen remained safe and protected until the end of the war, when they were safely repatriated to their units. Their protectors did not fare as well. The war and its aftermath were costly. The Croatian population was decimated, their political system scarred deeply.
I have seen and experienced so much. But I could never for 1 second cast from my mind the tragedy of the Croatian people. I am grateful to remain alive so that I can tell the truth to the American public about Croatia in World War II. However, when I got back to the States, I heard some stories about the mistreatment of American POWs in Croatia. I was particularly disturbed by the misstatements of facts by one of the writers of the New York Daily News, Paul Meskel. On Friday, July 19, 1974, an article written by Mr. Meskel stated that American airmen were killed by the dozens in Croatia in World War II. No. His comments ran counter to everything I experienced firsthand with American POWs in Croatia in World War II.
In 1966, the Baroness, by then in her 70s, had 2 art exhibitions in the United States. She and I reunited in Columbus, Ohio. It was deeply touching to see her again. She autographed a painting for me. It says, "To my old friend, Gene Keck, in remembrance of bygone days." The painting adds warmth, history, and color to my home. The Baroness's gift hangs a few feet from my living room memorial, featuring a photo of my bomber crew, a B-24 model, my ripcord handle, a shadow box that contains my 9 medals, and a photo of my buddy, George Conway from Texarkana.
Let me say also, in 1979, I was a guest of honor at a Los Angeles Croatian Day celebration. I announced then that I still had my voucher and vowed to cash it in when Croatia gained its independence.
It would be 45 years before they finally established an independent democratic country in 1991, which is today the Republic of Croatia. The deep internal divisions are healing. The painful but liberating process of seeking truth and reconciliation is underway. The enormous strength, dignity, humility, and decency of the Croatians who protected the American pilots and prevailed against Serbian aggression in the Croatian War for Independence point to a bright, beckoning future.
Again, don't know where